Are you good? Are you good, Steve? Good afternoon. We'll call to order the Lake Havasu Metropolitan Planning Organization Executive Board meeting on Tuesday, April 12, 2022 at 2 p.m. If you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And Ms. Lojewski, if you'd please call the roll.
Kel Sheehy,
Here.
Buster Johnson,
Here.
Nancy Campbell,
Here.
Gary Knight,
Present.
Jenny Koch,
All right, we do have a quorum. Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is a call to the public. This is an opportunity for citizens wishing to address the executive board on issues within the jurisdiction of the Lake Havasu Metropolitan Planning Organization and Planning Area that are not on the agenda. I don't see anyone here for call to the public, so we'll go ahead and close that. Item 5 is our meeting minutes from our February 8th, 2022 meeting. Are there any corrections, comments, or changes? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Mayor, motion. I motion to accept the minutes as presented.
Would like
Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Campbell and a second from Mr. Knight. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Item 6 is the fiscal year 2022 Transportation Improvement Plan. Mr. Hembry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. So for the FY22 TIP Amendment number 1, this is actually a consolidated TIP amendment. There's several funding sources and several projects. So instead of splitting those out, we condense them and do those as one single TIP amendment. But in your packet, we broke those out as subsections. So you'll see 1.1 through 1.6. So with the first one, 1.1, and if I could share my screen, please, Steve. I don't know if that's possible. Hopefully, thank you. So hopefully you all can see that. The first one was an administrative amendment, and this was for the HSIP project for FY22 and 23 for the London Bridge Road. Long story short, this was originally programmed in FY23 for design and construction. ADOT reached out and said, hey, we're ready to go with the project early. The scope's not changing, the budget's not changing. We are just pulling design out and getting ready ahead of schedule. So that's good news. So again, administrative, nothing really changed, just splitting those out. So that's Amendment 1.1. Now for 1.2 through 1.5, I'm going to do this a little bit different this time. Instead of going through each project, I want to just kind of go over the big picture. So what we did on the tip is basically for STBG funding for this year, we're in essence canceling all of our projects with the exception of one. We're going to keep the traffic signal ITS project, but we are going to move it from this fiscal year to next and dump all of our STBG funding towards that project. So what that looks like is the first project for STBG on the tip for 22 is what they call to be determined. It was not actually a project, it was just a placeholder for roughly $545,000 in federal funds. Again, there was no project identified for this, so we want to push all of those funds towards the traffic signal project. The other project that we would like to cancel is the State Route 95, the pavement preservation. Originally, this $200,000 was identified as more of a contribution to the 2021 legislative project that has already been awarded. ADOT basically reached out and said, we don't want to mix federal funds with local funds that would federalize the project, cause too much chaos. So lo and behold, we have $200,000 sitting on the tip we need to get rid of. Again, we'd like to take those funds, push them towards the ITS project. And then the last one was roughly $43,000, just shy of $43,000 for what we're calling FY 27 and 28 HSIP evaluation applications. That was just for crash data analysis for future call for projects that hasn't come about yet. So with that, where we're at with the HSIP call for projects, currently we're in FY 25 to 26. They had been postponed roughly a year. So where we're at now, we don't really need funding for FY 27 and 28 applications because we're still working on 25 and 26. So with that, we wanted to cancel all of those funds and again, push them to the traffic signal ITS. So for the traffic signal ITS project, we are moving those funds because we're towards the end of the year now. We would like to move that project for from FY 22 to 23 and push all of our STBG towards that. And not only do that, but we'd also like to do a HERF swap. So instead of the city coming up with their local match out of pocket, out of general funds, we would do what they call a HERF swap. And it's basically taking, it's 90 cents on the dollar. So for every dollar, ADOT asks for that 10 cents that the MPO coughs up, but none of those funds come out of the regional pocket. So what that final figure looks like would roughly be 1,139,000, but for the city side of it, it would be just over $1,025,927 would be what the budget for this project is, and that 113,000 is what we would have to give to ADOT for their pound of flesh, so to speak. So again, no funds would come out of the city's pocket. We really enjoy the HERF Exchange project. I promote it every chance I can get because it doesn't take from the regional or from the local general fund. So those are TIP amendments 1.2 through 1.5. Those are formal because as you can see in red, we're canceling those three projects. We're canceling 22-11, 22-113, 22-114, and then we're just simply reprogramming 22-112 from this year to next. And Mr. Chairman and board members, at the end of this packet on this agenda item, there is a breakdown. It's a rough cost estimate on what that traffic signal ITS project in essence could look like. Where we're at with that is currently the SR 95 pavement preservation project. They're looking to go out to bid for construction sometime I'd say late fall, early winter. We're trying to, on the MPO side, coordinate with that project, mainly because this ITS project, we're trying to get rid of our loop detectors and move towards a radar detector. They're just more efficient. You don't have to tear up the pavement when it's time to replace these things. So there's two spreadsheets there. There's one in orange, one in blue. The orange one is basically the costs associated with the SR 95 improvements, and the blue table is costs associated with Lake Havasu Avenue. Again, our goal is to update the signals, update any cabinets that may need to be updated, any fiber optic installs, hopefully some pedestrian signal timing upgrades as well. So this is just a rough cost estimate. This has been forwarded to city staff, but where we're at with it right now is if we approve this TIP amendment, that project, the ITS project, gets programmed into next year, and then we could begin to scope it appropriately with that $1 million budget. And then last but not least is, sorry, real quick, my computer froze here, is the 5307 transit funds at the city side. So for this amendment, it's considered administrative. We basically work with Patrick Cypress and Jeanette Buckley. They give us the projects that they've either canceled or deleted. We plug those into the TIP, but there's no bearing on any MPO funds. And seeing that the city council is the governing body of the 5307 transit or Havasu transit, they're not considered a fiscal impact to the MPO. So that would just be an administrative amendment. Again, in your packet, in your memos is the full-blown detail for each one of these TIP amendments. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hembury, and thank you for the thorough review of that. It makes sense based on the conversations we've been having at this board level. Any questions from any members of the board? Councilmember Campbell?
A new member question. What is the difference between the loops and the grib stops? I could look that up later, but I was hoping, since you asked me a question.
That's what we've called, that's just the name for the radar detection. So instead of the loops that go into the asphalt where you have to run over them to detect whether there's a vehicle or a pedestrian, they use the radar camera detection systems. And then also we are trying to get more of what they call an adaptive, to where each signal, so say you're on like McCulloch and Lake Havasu, and then Swanson and Lake Havasu, and then SR 95, we would want those signals to basically communicate to one another to update the timing in real time. So instead of having like a coordination plan where they go out and I call them fancy egg timers, but you basically go time your signals, that adaptive technology would talk to one another. So if, say you have a special event and there's a lot of volumes coming to those various intersections, those systems can talk to each other and adapt on the fly versus a loop detector where I'm sure we've all been there. You pull up and there's nobody coming and the light's green. You're like, okay, I'm waiting. So the radar is just a much better detection system.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of any members of the board? All right, seeing none, this is a public hearing. Would anyone like to address the board on this issue? We have no one here in person, so we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for possible motion or any additional discussion. Right here.
Mayor, motion?
Please.
I motion to approve the FY 2022 TIP Amendment number 1.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion from Councilmember Campbell and a second from Mr. Knight. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, item 7 on our agenda is the Lone Surface Transportation Block Grant, the STBG. Mr. Hembry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So expecting that we would approve the TIP amendment, now we basically have a scenario where any funds that are not contractually obligated to a project, if they're just sitting there in limbo, they're use it or lose it. So we can't have those funds on the books or they will be swept. So to transfer those funds or to carry forward those funds from FY22 into FY23 for that ITS project, we do that through the loan process where the MPO basically loans out our funds to ADOT or another MPO or COG organization, and we ask for the repayment in future fiscal years. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we're asking for all lapsing funds in FY22 and STBG to be loaned to ADOT with repayment in next year for FY23. We're expecting roughly $865,000, but that is subject to change between now and the end of the year, mainly because those appropriation numbers come in from ADOT and sometimes they fluctuate. Not a lot, but it could be a few $100 here and there. But for the most part, we put the language in there, all lapsing funds. That way we cover everything.
Yeah, great. Any questions from any members of the board? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Would anyone like to address the board on this issue? Seeing none, and we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for discussion or possible motion.
Mayor,
Yeah, Councilmember Campbell.
I motion to approve the FY 2022 loan number 1.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Councilmember Campbell, a second from Supervisor Johnson. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to item 8 on our agenda. Item 8 is officer election for secretary and treasurer. So we have had a change on our executive board. Councilmember David Lane is no longer the representative, and Councilmember Nancy Campbell has been appointed as a member from the Lake Havasu City Council. Currently, I serve as chair. Supervisor Johnson serves as the vice chair, and we had Mr. Lane serving as the secretary and treasurer. So we would like to open it for nominations, but Councilmember Campbell, taking the spot of Councilmember Lane, has indicated she'd be willing to serve in the secretary-treasurer role. So unless there's any additional discussion, or if Councilmember Campbell, you have anything you'd like to say?
All I would like to say on that, if there's been people that have been doing this longer than I am that might be able to do a better job at secretary or treasurer, or if you feel that I can accomplish the job, I would be more than happy to do it. But being a brand new member, I'm a little concerned about my level of expertise. Anybody else have more?
Thank you, Councilmember Campbell. Well, you know, we don't ever leave anyone behind. So, and we know you're a quick study, and you got this. So I have confidence if the rest of the board has confidence, and if you're willing to serve in that capacity.
You betcha.
Perfect. All right. Without any further nominations, then we'll go ahead and open this public hearing. Would anyone like to address the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close that and bring it back to council for possible motion or any additional discussion.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Supervisor Johnson?
motion to elect Councilman Campbell as the Secretary Treasurer.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Supervisor Johnson and a second from Mr. Knight. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Councilmember Campbell. Item 9 of our agenda is election and appointment of the RTAC representative for the RTAC board. And again, Mr. Lane, who was previously on this board, served in that capacity. And we would propose that Councilmember Campbell take that lead, working with Mr. Hembury, being our liaison from the board to the RTAC. If there's any additional comments or thoughts, and if you're willing to serve in that capacity as well, Councilmember Campbell.
I look forward to it.
Perfect. All right, without any comments or thoughts, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Would anyone like to address the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll close that and bring it back to the board for a possible motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to appoint Councilwoman Campbell as the RTAC representative.
Second.
Excellent, thank you. We do have a motion and a second. Motion by Mr. Knight and a second from Supervisor Johnson. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing that, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations, Councilmember Campbell. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Item 10 on our agenda is the Rural Transportation Advocacy Council, RTAC report. Mr. Adam, good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon and hello, everyone. And Councilmember Campbell, I appreciate your willingness to serve on the board. We try to make it as a minimal obligation as possible. We do meet typically monthly virtually. And other than that, I think the big primary responsibility will be to carry forward our transportation agenda with the congressional and legislative delegation up your way. So again, thanks. And I'm always open to talk, and I'm sure I'll do anything I can as far as to help you with the learning curve on transportation and the agenda that we have for rural Arizona. And with that, it's an extremely busy time at the legislature. We just finished up the committee work for the year, and so they are putting the finishing touches on those few remaining bills that have made it all the way through the process so far. For us, the big issue with transportation, as is usually the case, is funding. And so much of our focus is on what occurs with the budget, and that is the one big remaining outstanding issue that they have to work with. And we do have a very unique circumstance that I have never seen. We're looking at historically high revenue levels. I think much of that was a result of both the federal and state reactions to COVID. And then on top of that, the very dire expectations for revenue collections, which did not pan out. And in fact, we continue to see tremendous revenue growth at the state level. Right now, we're averaging 18% over last year, and there was significant growth last year. So we're talking growth over growth. And in fact, the legislature's Finance Advisory Committee met late last week, and and every time they've met, they've consistently upped the forecast levels. And so right now, depending on how you look at it, but they believe they're going to have a revenue balance in excess of $4 billion. And this is additional money above ongoing expenditures that they'll have to work with when they do set this year's budget. Roughly $2.8 billion of that is estimated to be one-time in nature. And that's really where the focus of our efforts are, because what we are attempting to do with all of the needs and the demand that's out there for infrastructure funding is to try to direct as much of that as possible to the infrastructure to make up for the historical shortfalls that we've now had for several decades. And so, and of course, there's going to be a lot of competition for that. The governor does have a $1 billion plan for water development for the state. That provides revenue capacity for further tax cuts. There's going to be a lot of interest in seeing a lot of additional funding directed to K-12. But we also were very confident that transportation is fairly high up on that agenda for that one-time funding. We know that the governor has already asked in his budget proposal to provide $400 million to complete I guess I shouldn't say complete, but to substantially come closer to completing the widening of I-10 between Phoenix and Tucson. And then there's another $50 million that he has proposed, which would create what he's calling the SMART Fund. And this would be exclusive to Greater Arizona. And what it would do is provide funding assistance to prepare federal grant applications. And also, there would be an eligibility to utilize this funding to provide the local match for a federal grant. So we think that's has tremendous potential to really maximize the ability of Greater Arizona to bring in as much of the additional federal funding that will be made available through competitive grants. But then on top of that, I think most of you are probably aware at the RTAC level, all of the rural COGs and MPOs went through a 10-month process this last year to develop a list of priority projects that we would pursue as far as funding in the state budget this year. And we were able to move that bill through the House Transportation Committee. And then Appropriations Chair Cobb indicated that she only wanted to see state projects in the state budget. About 90% of the projects that were in that bill were local, including the Lake Havasu MPO project, which was pavement rehab on Swanson Avenue, were local. And so I know that several folks, in fact, Councilmember Lane being one of them, tried to move her off of that position. We were unsuccessful, and we quickly developed a list of alternative state projects across Greater Arizona that would meet her criteria for being included in the budget, and that included substantially increasing the funding and hopefully meet all of the funding needs to fully repave SR 95 through your city limits. And so we've continued to work with legislators on crafting that list in a way that the majority of them will be supportive of. But then also in circling back with the Senate, we met with President Fan, and she indicated that she didn't like that direction. In fact, she liked that original list of projects and the funding for local projects. And so we are now at a point where leadership is in budget discussions. And the good news is that we're on the table as far as both House and Senate leadership are concerned. But there is a difference in that, the House Appropriations Chair wants to see state projects, and Senate leadership wants the local. And so, it remains to be seen how that will pan out. But I think we're in a fairly decent position to bring additional funding to rural Arizona's infrastructure. I think that even though they're going to be able to turn more and more focus to the budget now that the committee work is done, with the very slim majorities that are in the House and the Senate, that's really going to complicate getting the votes to pass a budget. Last year they had 1 day to spare before the new state fiscal year started, and they're rarely that late. But I think there's a really good chance that we could see a similar circumstance this year. I know they're working towards crafting a budget right now, but it's always a little bit unpredictable as far as when they'll have the votes to actually enact something. So that's something I'll obviously keep everybody in the loop on. But in the interim, appreciate it if you just stay in touch with your delegation and continue to hammer home the point that we've got some massive infrastructure shortfalls out there, and we'd like to see as much of this revenue that they have to work with directed to the highways and the streets. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Adam. Are there any questions of any members of the board?
One quick question is, for the first time ever being a wholesale concrete and asphalt supplier here in Kingman, I'm noticing allocations for the first time in our life from oil to concrete. And have we considered this as like every other supply as a mass increase? I just hate for any of our projects to get stopped along the way. Have we been adding a percentage on, and how are we tracking the supply issues that everybody in the world is facing today? Because I've never experienced allocations like I'm experiencing this last month.
That is an excellent question, and I think that it's everyone in the development, the transportation development business. It's something that I think everybody needs to be paying very close attention to, and that's a problem or a challenge with earmarking at the state level, is that you're dealing with a very inflexible amount of money that gets appropriated. Unlike programming where you do have a little bit of flexibility. But inflation has certainly hit transportation infrastructure. As far as the legislative proposals that we've put forward, we've used the numbers that we've directly received from the local jurisdictions or ADOT. But I do think that that is a risk that we could certainly be looking at cost increases that surpass what's appropriated for specific projects.
I just know that ADOT does allow for that in all their contracts, but those prices can go up enormously quickly based on some of these issues that I've just discussed. So those are my big concerns, that if everybody is aware going into this, that we're going to have to probably dig a little deeper unless something, some sort of miracle happens in the next year or so.
Yes, those are very legitimate concerns.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments for Mr. Adam? All right. Thank you, Mr. Adam, for being with us.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to item 11 is our ADOT district report. Mr. Steinenberger.
Good afternoon, Board. First project is the pavement preservation project from Center Park to I-40. Justin already briefly covered this. We're looking at getting the stage 3, the 60% design, at the end of this month, early May, to start reviewing, and we're looking at advertising this late fall, early winter. It'll be our fiscal year 23 second quarter. And then for the signal timing, coordination, upgrades, we're excited to partner with the MPO and the city, and we're still discussing internally, and then we're looking to set up a meeting later this month or early May to discuss with the MPO in the city kind of a scope and to move forward with that project through our permitting process. That's kind of the brief update I had for today. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Thank you for the update. Are there any questions of Mr. Steinenberger from any member of the board? All right, well, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, and then the next item is item 12, the Arizona Transportation Board Report. Mr. Knight?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. From last month's meeting in Marana, the board did award a contract. We've had the I15 milepost 27.3 rehab, northbound and southbound bridge decks, also include milling and paving. Stockton Hill Road, Fountain Hill Road in Cedar from milepost 6.75 to milepost 21.75, install an edge line, rumble strips, and speed feedback signs. The contract was awarded contingent upon the contractor procuring the appropriate licensing. He was from Nevada, and it would ADOT feels sure that he will have the appropriate licensing by, we were supposed to have it by today, 4/12. So that one, they were sure he would, so that one will move forward. So those are the two items that were on the last Transportation Board meeting in Marana that were approved by the board. Unfortunately, I'm just going over the agenda for Friday, the 15th, and there are no agenda items concerning Lake Havasu or Mojave County in that agenda. There aren't any in there for Yuma County. The only items in there for my district were Yavapai County. So nothing's on the agenda unless they come out with an amendment. There's nothing on the upcoming agenda. It will be in Nogales on Friday, open to the public and virtual. It's a hybrid. It'll be a hybrid meeting, as most of probably all the rest of them this year will be. You can attend virtually or you can attend in person. I will be in Nogales in person, and that concludes my report unless somebody has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Any questions of members of the board for Mr. Knight? All right. Again, thank you for being here. Item 13, are there any future agenda items for the executive board to consider? All right. Seeing none, our upcoming meeting schedule is our next Lake Havasu Metropolitan Planning Organization TAC meeting will be on May 24th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m. And then we'll have our next MPO executive board meeting on June 14th, 2022 at 2 p.m. And as Mr. Knight had mentioned, the State Transportation Board meeting is April 15th, 2022 in Nogales. All right, with that, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Excellent. We have a motion to adjourn. We are adjourned. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.